Chapter 3. Least Concern. It was part of the deal that Eunice had agreed to when she began to stay at the Federation's headquarters. If they were going to give her a platform alongside Nexus, then she'd have to fight with them too when the threat arose. Sitting next to him in the large meeting room, Eunice couldn't help but let her mind drift to what other ultimatums they'll spring on her. Roth entered in a hurry, moving precisely with an unexpected elegance of a man of his stature. He was suited up in his bronze-toned armor, now living up to the title of top hero, Calfaction, and ready for a fight. It had been a few weeks since their training incident, leaving no traces of broken bones on either party's bodies. What was once an intermediate threat has now turned into a top priority. His voice boomed over the chattering crowd of heroes. Silence fell upon them like a wave as all eyes turned to Calfaction, who stood at the head of the table. He scanned the room, eyes lagging on Eunice before addressing the others again. In a recent turn of events, the once vigilante of the moors, codenamed Bonfire, has now been upgraded to a serious threat. The villain of the Cinder Track has now been assumed to be responsible for multiple arson cases, and in cases like this, bombings, he continued. The room filled with hushed talk amongst each other. Eunice chose to try to tune them out, mentally reaching towards Nathan. I never ran into this guy back in my time in the moors. Did you? He barely turned his head in acknowledgement, eyes still locked onto Roth at the front. He took a moment before replying to her within their mind. No, but I've heard about him from the other heroes. He's unpredictable, feeds off of the chaos. She couldn't help but smile, barely smothering a laugh that threatened to bubble out of her lips. Good thing we do too, she shot back, sharing a grin with him. It was good to laugh while they still could, before the assignment was completed. This is the second time this month that a former vigilante has now fallen into the category of concern as a villain, Roth said to recapture the attention of the room. Eunice mentally scoffed, certain that his wording was intentional. But even she couldn't deny a trend when she saw one. The vigilante she once knew from the moors seemed to grow more violent in her absence. Not that she had thought that the two events correlated. Since her stay at the Federation's headquarters, she had only been back to the moors twice, and even those were brief visits. What are we dealing with? Nathan asked Roth, messing with the cuff of his hero suit. He had suffered endless teasing when Eunice had finally seen it in person, but that was only because she had never admitted how good it looked on him. The armor plate that rested on his chest was a muted green, detailed in black with the Valiant Federation logo in white at the center. His arm cuffs shared the same green, standing out from the rest of his black suit. It was a clear homage to the scrappy outfit that he wore in his vigilante years, and she couldn't help but smile at the thought. Eunice received her upgrade disguise shortly after her arrival, clear proof of the Federation that was certain of their partnership. Similarly to Nathan's suit, she wore a black athletic wear that was covered by plates of armor. Steel tones covered her chest, legs, and arms that reflected whatever dull lighting was around. To feed into her branding as the Eagle, her appearance was accompanied with a built-in cloak that was laced with white feathers near the shoulders. Nathan tried to reason that they were trying to make her a symbol, but Eunice just scoffed at the impracticality of it all. However, she did appreciate the metal mask that was created alongside it, silver detailing creating an almost beak-like outline on the cover. The design wasn't something she'd create herself, but she figured beggars couldn't be choosers. We're dealing with a potential bomb threat at a civilian hospital, Calfaction bluntly stated. It felt as if the atmosphere dropped within the room, turning icy cold with dread. One of the few rules that was shared between heroes and vigilantes. If and when things get messy, leave innocent bystanders out of it. Is it a dead man's switch, or is he off-site? Eunice chimed in, capturing the attention of a few heroes close by. She could hear their muttered comments about whether trusting her was the right call or not, but she elected to tune them out to focus on Roth. It is assumed that he would have fled the scene after the bomb was planted, he explained to the crowd. His heartbeat picked up as he quickly turned his attention to another hero's question. Eunice leaned closer to Nathan, meeting his eye. He's not sure, is he? She asked. Absolutely not, Nathan snorted. After a few more comments and questions from the fellow heroes, the room died down as Calfaction began to tell them their specific assignments. Depending on their track and their abilities would determine whether they were scouting for the villain, clearing out the area, or staying back at headquarters to relay information to the heroes in the field. The two of them were going restless as Roth jumped over them, leaving their assignment for last. Nexus Eagle. "I'm trusting you with disarming Bonfire under any means necessary," he said, cold and certain. Underlying threats were a hero's specialty, so what he meant to say was, "Clear the room." Everyone filed out with purpose, leaving the three of them alone in the silence. Enos pushed past the ringing in her ears as she stood, ready to leave with them. "A lot of people will be watching this play out," he began to say before they could exit, arms crossed and looming over the two young adults. "They won't be just watching because there are heroes in the moors, and it's not because they're curious about what we're doing there. This is the first assignment that 2 former vigilantes will be in charge of." "One former vigilante, 1 active," Enos corrected instantly, daring him to dispute. He didn't, thankfully, and handed them each an item wrapped in a cloth. Hesitantly, they unwrapped the items, revealing 2 metal cuff bracelets. Their new technology being developed in the Brandstone's lab, here in the headquarters, by an anonymous engineer, he barely explained. Wordlessly, Nathan slipped one on his arm, his presence immediately disappearing from Enos's mind. Her attention immediately snapped over to him, a frown pulling at her lips. "What the hell?" he hissed, flinging the metal cuff off in a haste. His presence returned, along with some of his shared anxiety. Both turned to Roth for answers, who pushed the discarded cuff back towards the two. "They dampen the abilities of any track. Don't ask me how they work, because I don't know either. But all I know is that they work, and they will help against a bonfire," he explained bluntly. They let contemplative silence fall among them, staring at the new contraption discarded on the table. "This is wrong," Enos finally spoke. Roth drew in a minuscule breath, ready to argue, before Nathan wrapped them back up in cloth and held them away from his body like they were toxic. "We'll only take them to satisfy you. We're not going to use them," he pledged, handing one of the bundles to Enos. It felt like live wires beneath her fingers, regardless of the material separating them from touching her bare skin. She nodded slightly at Nathan, then looking back up to Roth, waiting. "Use them, don't use them. I personally have no opinion either way. What I do have an opinion on is if this assignment goes well, because it has to. Understood?" Both nodded, which Roth returned the gesture. Without another word, they left him alone in the room, heading back to the dorm to prepare for their leave. "Who the hell would make something like this?" Nathan questioned as soon as their door was shut and locked. Enos blew out a harsh sigh, tossing the cuffs onto their desk. "I'm more as curious as to why they were made," she added, pulling the white cloak of her suit tighter around her body. She silently hoped it would hold her body heat, already dreading the unnatural chill that came with her home district. The moors had always felt colder in compared to the headquarters, or anywhere else in Fioda's district. There was a running joke between Nathan and Enos that the moors were freezing because they were haunted. For many years, heroes neglected the poorest district in favor of the higher-ups. That's why vigilantes became so prevalent in their culture. They were actually helping them with the crime rates and the street deaths. By no means could they do everything the heroes could, but it was a start. Even though they helped, there were still ghosts wandering the old streets, leaving a frigid reminder that they weren't better. Not yet. "We're heading to the clinic, the one named after Charity," Nathan said after snatching his phone. Charity Karas, more commonly known as the Bandit, was a vigilante well known in the moors. She was part of the material track, working on the development of stitches that could work better on all types of skin. For example, some people within the strength track had thicker skin, too tough to be pierced through by a needle. Charity was able to find an alternative for them, along with those with thinner skin. When she disappeared suddenly, assumed dead, the Moors had pledged to keep her memory alive by renaming the hospital. Enos had met her a few times through her vigilante career, and she'd always be thankful for her quick patch job that she provided. When they were both vigilantes, Nathan and Enos would rely on each other to play medic if they got hurt. When he was unavailable, Enos had made some new allies that made her eternally grateful for the pack mentality people in the moors carried. Protecting their own, especially those who wore a mask to help them, was what separated them from the heroes. When a well-renowned hero disappeared from the public eye, civilians didn't flinch. When it came to the vigilantes, that was a whole other story. Charity Karas did not fade into a distant memory, like a few of the missing heroes, and everyone in the moors would make sure of it. Without another word, they grabbed the last of their items, as well as the cuffs begrudgingly, and they made their way to their transport to the other side of the city. Both equipped with earpieces, Enos bit back a pained sound at the squeal of feedback. They didn't speak as they were driven into the poorest district, transitioning from the highest tech to the rundown apartments. The air even smelled damp, stale, like something was rotting out of sight. We have a confirmed heat signature in the building. Bonfire is already prepared in the basement, alone, a voice over their comms stated bluntly. There's no room for error now, like there ever was. Dead man switch? Enos asked Nathan, who nodded grimly. It would be difficult trying to defuse a bomb, but now with it practically attached to the person who wanted nothing more than to blow it up, it seemed almost impossible. At least to a normal person. But right now, there were no run-of-the-mill heroes who were looking for a quick moment of fame. No, right now they were not Enos Wake and Nathan Cuddy of the Moors. They were the Eagle and Nexus, feared and respected figures of both vigilantes and heroes. Taking a moment to listen, a voice caught her attention in the distance. Come on, heroes, I know you can hear me. All I want to do is talk. The outcome is solely up to you, the villain called out, just for Enos to hear. His voice was high and deranged, but there was no mistake that it was Bonfire. Eagle quickly relayed the information to those around her on the comms, which caused a few quiet swears. There's a back door on the east side of the building, which leads straight down to the basement. There's no point in dragging this out if he has his mind set on what he wants to do, Nexus said, already moving in lockstep with Eagle. A few more voices chirped on the other side of the line with official hero jargon that she didn't quite understand, but seemed to confirm their actions as they weren't stopped. The Karis Clinic looked like the only well-kept building in the Moors. By no means did it compare to what Enos had grown accustomed to in the Fiotis district, but by her old standards, it looked brand new. Another way to keep Charity's memory alive, keep her hospital from falling apart. We're not supposed to engage until he does first, Nathan told her mentally. He's supposed to lead this meeting. We're only supposed to react. His tone was guarded as he explained the hero's code of conduct. No matter how many times it was explained to her, she couldn't help but scoff at it. What happens when someone decides to attack first and a hero is too slow to react? Regardless, she still felt safe knowing that she was going to the battle with Nexus at her side. Along with trusting him with every fiber of her being, Mindtrack heroes were always great allies, but horrible enemies. Enos had faced a few circumstances where she was no longer in control of her body because of one, and it was never an enjoyable experience. Reaching the back door, the world seemed to quiet just for a moment. The only sound she could hear was the electric buzz of the silent calms, their shared breathing, and Nathan's steady heartbeat. In a moment, right before he could reach for the handle, Enos reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing lightly. What? No kiss good luck, he teased, returning her grip. Barking out a laugh, she reluctantly dropped her hand and decided to continue the joke to chase away their rising nerves. Nope, kisses are reward for a job well done, she retorted with an air of certainty. Nathan threw his head back in laughter, small dimples appearing. It was at that moment Enos decided that if she could listen to one sound over and over again for the rest of eternity, it would be that. I guess I'll have to try extra hard to not get burnt to a crisp, he joked back, nudging her shoulders with his. The green armor dug slightly into the weak point in her suit, but the pain was minuscule. Taking a deep breath to compose herself, she decided on one more quip. I'd hope you're trying to survive every mission, not just the one where I promise a kiss afterwards, she chuckled, placing a gloved hand on the handle. All Nathan could do was huff out another laugh before schooling his expression and following her down to the hospital basement. It was a suffocating energy shift from where they stood outside. The walls down the stair corridor seemed to muffle any sound that would resonate around them. The faint sounds and smells of the sick and dying clung to the eagle's senses as she descended lower and farther away. The walk down felt like it lasted forever, but eventually the two reached the bottom. Focusing, the eagle found the lone heartbeat of the villain, a steady drum that could very well be a death march. Immediately her eyes fell on the figure standing next to a canister of a different chemical. There were some wiring mechanisms that were hidden beneath the metal shell, but it was easily recognizable as their bomb. The man was lanky and thin, towering at least 3 inches over Nexus. He was wearing a baseball cap and a medical mask, obscuring his identity. Despite this, it didn't hide the fact that his wrinkled skin of the corner of his eyes, giving away his large smile as his eyes locked onto the two entering. He waved at them with the same eagerness as he would an old friend, rings on his fingers glistening in the dim light of the basement. Welcome, heroes. I hope your trip all the way down from Fiotis didn't give you too much of a hassle, Bonfire practically cackled. He tucked his arms behind himself, and the eagle could hear a twinge of muscles as his thumb rested and held the detonate button down. Bonfire, you asked for us to come and speak with you, so let's skip the pleasantries, Nexus opened, daring to take a step closer. Bonfire seemed to have no reaction, causing Eagle to match his distance. I did, and I have reasons for my madness, I promise, he explained gleefully. Turning around, he grabbed a newspaper off of a nearby table, tossing it in their direction. Cautiously, Eagle picked it up and began to read aloud. Fergus Hansen, villain previously known as Vigor, lessons sentence in prison. As far as Enos knew, Fergus was serving life with no chance of parole, meaning that the situation shouldn't have been possible. She looked over to Nexus, whose expression was masked with neutrality, although the tug in her mind was a clear indication of their shared confusion. Bonfire hummed and nodded, stalking close to the duo. "Are you getting the bigger picture yet?" he asked, uncharacteristically low and serious. "You want him released," Nexus stated, hands twitching ever so slightly in case he lunged at them. Instead of trying to attack them or yell and demand for them to listen to his demands, Bonfire did none of those things. Instead, he laughed. He carried on to almost the point of tears, like it was the funniest thing in the world. He paced away, back turned to the two of them, chuckling and repeating Nexus's words back to himself. In a swift moment, he turned on his heel to face them again, still grinning beneath his mask. "No, I don't need old Fergie running around these streets again, ruining everything. What I want is for him to die," he shouted, his hands squeezing around the base of the detonator threateningly. The Eagle leaned forward as if to reach out and rip it from his hands, but instead reached out to Nexus mentally. I could smell that his adrenaline is through the roof. We don't have much time before he loses his patience. Imperceptibly, Nexus sighed, keeping an eye on the villain. "Bonfire, there isn't anything we can do about Fergus," he tried, narrowly avoiding the small ball of sparks that Bonfire shot his way. As soon as they sizzled out on the concrete behind them, Eagle tried to lunge for him, only for her legs not to cooperate. "What are you doing?" she hissed to Nexus, feeling the eerie loss of control once again. "You attack him now, he detonates this whole building. There is not enough time for the others to evacuate the entire hospital, so we have to stall him," he explained calmly. She knew he was right, focusing on the distant shuffling of their allies still working on the floors above them. One last tug for control, she relented and let Nexus take the lead. "Oh, on the contrary, dear hero, you can do whatever you want with Fergus. I'm sorry, truly, for the extreme measures, but this seems the only way you heroes know how to listen," Bonfire laughed, hopping up onto the table with his legs crossed. Surprisingly, his heartbeat remained steady and slow, showing he was truthful in his apology. "We only deal with detaining criminals, not their sentencing," Nexus tried, only to be cut off by another maniacal laugh. "You still believe that?" he asked, waving his hands around as if one of them didn't hold life or death in it. "Believe what exactly?" Enos gritted out, feeling some control return to her legs. "Come on, Eagle, I wouldn't be so blind if I were you," he said, causing cold dread to fill her chest. She could feel another mental tug from Nexus, sharing her confusion and fear. Even though that was only logical that he knew her name, most vigilantes in the moors had at least heard of one another. "What exactly am I being blind about?" she fished. "You're telling me you joined the heroes for the thrill of the fame?" "No, I don't buy it. Nexus here, maybe. You were always a bit of a drama queen back in the day. But I digress. Eagle, on the other hand, had always had some goal, some overarching plan in whatever she did. So I figured that either I'm wrong and you are in it for the recognition, or you're looking to tear the heroes apart." She couldn't help but snicker at the villain's monologue. Sure, a world without superheroes would be nice, as they've all caused a clear rift in the healthy and the poor, but she isn't a traitor by any means. She looked back over to Nathan to see that he was thinking, but his face was still neutral. Shaking her head, she took another step closer to where Bonfire sat, and then another. She stood close enough now that if she was fast enough, she could reach out and grab the deadman switch. "You think you know me, but you're wrong," she began calmly. "You are building an imaginary case for someone you've only ever heard about through rumors on the streets. Even if I insisted I was fighting with the heroes for the same reason I told the press, you've already made up your mind about me." He nodded, deep in thought, before meeting her eyes and smiling unkindly. "You know, many people assume that just because I laugh and prance around that I'm a villain who shouldn't be taken seriously. Even now, you haven't even asked why I chose this hospital," he shouted hysterically, throwing his arms up in the air. Reaching out, she wrapped a strong hand around his wrist, keeping the detonator steady. Nexus inhaled a sharp breath, tensing to see what Bonfire was going to do. He just looked at her hand, unmoving. "Why here?" she asked quietly. "Because I'm tired of the heroes making people disappear just because they can," he hissed, wrenching his hand away from the eagle and landing a solid kick to her chest. Unprepared, she tumbled away, landing on the cold floor of the hospital basement. Distantly, she could hear the clatter of a useless calm that fell out of her ear onto the ground. In a flash, Nexus was moving towards Bonfire, who stood and took a few steps back. "Forgetting something?" he asked, holding up the Deadman switch in his hand. For a moment, the duo could only stare as the villain stood unwavering. "Something's wrong," Nexus told her, shifting imperceptibly. His eyes stayed locked onto Bonfire's tense form, but his anxiety translated over to her mind. She slowly rose back to her feet, just momentarily protesting as she gave him a challenging look. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Like he has some sort of wall built in his mind. I can't get in." Before she could reply, Bonfire sighed loudly and then once again spoke. Charity Karras was not only a respected and loved vigilante, but a genius as well. So, when she got the attention of the beloved heroes, they offered her a job. "Sound familiar?" he said as his eyes locked onto the eagles. But Charity, too, was blinded by the promises of a better future, a better life. As soon as she posed a threat to the Federation, do you know what they did? They put her down like she was some animal. So taking out a hospital named after her, along with 6 civilians inside, is your idea of preserving her memory? Nathan asked, bewildered. This is the only message you heroes understand. At least Eagle took the road of respect and is trying to hold on to her poorer roots. You, Nathan, have completely gone gold-blooded and just as useless as one of them. Says the former vigilante going against everything we originally stood for, Enos accused. He shrugged, smiling under the medical mask without care. Surely, Enos thought, that was enough time to evacuate the patients. In a flash, she dove straight for his torso, sending them both in a flurry of limbs. He let out a surprised shout as one of her elbows managed to connect with his nose, a sickening crack following. It was a familiar sound, one that Enos was on the receiving end of just a few weeks ago. Without care, Bonfire reached up with his free hand, discarding the bloodied mask and wiping at the freshly broken nose. "You've always had guts, Eagle, which is what I liked about you. What Charity always liked about you," he laughed, voice clear and manic. His face had looked slightly familiar, but she couldn't place her finger on it. Enos continued to hold him pinned as she looked over to her partner. His eyes were blown wide and looked almost haunted. "What?" she tried to ask him quietly. Before Nathan could answer, Bonfire laughed wildly below her. "I'd be offended if you were anyone else, Eagle, but let me introduce myself. My name is King Solian. I'm a former hero who's smart enough to see the Federation's lies before they got me killed. I'd ask you to say hello to Eric Roth for me, but we both know that there's no way we're all making out of this basement alive." With Bonfire's words, he released the Deadman switch, and the world went quiet. The thing about being a vigilante rather than a licensed hero is that the threat levels dealt with had a vast difference. When the Eagle was a small-town savior, stopping bank robberies and assault crimes, she never had to worry about bombs. Sure, there were more than the occasional knife or even gunshot wound, but overall she had played it pretty safe in her years that she had fought for the Moors. Even if she had gotten too banged up, she could always rely on Nathan to patch her up, or in extreme cases, another vigilante that didn't mind sharing their identity with a complete stranger. Maybe that's why it was so disorienting, waking up surrounded by rubble and dust. The air tasted dry and suffocating, clinging to the inside of her throat and coating her lungs in grime from the debris. Somewhere to her right, she could feel the flames of a small fire push heat towards her suit-covered body. Worst of all, her ears were ringing with a ferocious whine that only seemed to be getting slightly better on one side. Raising her head felt like she was getting swept under a tidal wave, confusing which way was up. Getting to a kneeling position, she swiped the back of her hand over her face, coming back stained with blood. Her ears were in the same position, dripping the precious red liquid. Finally rising to her feet, she surveyed her surroundings. Half of the Karras clinic was still standing, but only barely. Singed and ready to collapse at any moment, a gentle breeze blew some ash to the street down below. Continuing her scan, her eyes caught on a tan hand from beneath a pile of rubble. Stumbling over, she uncovered the sickly body of a woman who looked vaguely familiar. Not in the way Bonfire was, but someone more recent and more personal. She knelt down, reaching for the identification wristband, and ran her suit-covered hand over the printed name. Melanie Knightley. The reporter from the Moors that she had talked to during the press conference. Speaking with her felt like it was a million years ago, which in reality was only a couple months. She looked almost peaceful where she laid, like she was just sleeping off of her illness instead of being dead and buried. She held the young woman's hand for a moment, giving it a squeeze before placing it gently on the ground below them. Staring for a moment, she was startled into action as a shadow was cast from behind her. Bonfire's knife just barely nicked her arm as she rolled out of the way. Although the hearing in one of her ears had returned mostly, it was hard to decipher what nonsense he was trying to say, but 2 words made her freeze. Nexus should never share a sentence with the word dead. Like all caution thrown to the wind, Eagle dove towards the villain with the momentum of a wrecking ball. No, this wasn't the Eagle going to fight another villain. This was Enos going to throw punches and deal wounds. From where they sprawled onto the ground, she could feel his laughter through his chest. She grabbed the front of his shirt and collided her fist against his jaw over and over. The only thing that stopped her from continuing was the sharp pressure of a knife attempting to dig into her ribs. She had pulled away before it could pierce the flesh, standing among the rubble and staring at Bonfire, rising. Leaving no time to recover for both of them, Enos began to prowl in a circle around the villain. He stood unmoving, watching her every move with the same disdain. His mouth moved once again, but Enos didn't particularly care to listen. If he was right and Nathan was dead, she'd make sure there was an eye for an eye. Running forward, she managed to duck under his extended arm with the knife, pushing him forward to trip over one of her legs. He stumbled, but ultimately recovered in a timely manner, flashing a wide smile at her. He quickly recovered his footing, charging right back at her, knife raised. Managing to knock her down, she wedged a foot between them, giving a harsh push to his chest. In the moment that he was pushed away, Enos reached behind her to grab anything that she could to use as a physical weapon. Her gloved hand wrapped around what she could only assume was a scorned pipe, swinging it at Bonfire's stomach. He stumbled back with a surprised grunt, landing on his back with a wheeze. Enos walked over to his crumpled form, looking down. He smiled up at her with bloody teeth, placing his palms down on the dusty ground below him. "It doesn't matter what you do to me now," he coughed out, still severely muffled to Enos's ears. "I've got what I wanted." Enos didn't reply, instead raising the pipe high above her head, poised to swing. With all the energy she could muster, she let it descend. Then a hand wrapped around hers, stopping it in place. There stood, bloody and burnt, Nathan Cuddy in the flesh. Portions of his suit were seared so badly it almost looked like it melded into his skin. He was panting, either from exhaustion or pain, and his eyes were wide with some emotion that Enos couldn't place. His lips moved, speaking too quietly for her ears to hear past the ringing. Instead of trying to understand, she dropped the pipe to the ground with a muted thud. "Can you hear anything?" he asked mentally, still not letting go of her wrist, even after she was disarmed. All she could do was shake her head, leaning her weight slightly into him, being mindful of both of their injuries. She released a sigh of relief, briefly closing her eyes and then looking back down to Bonfire. His eyes were trained on the murky sky of his own causation. Manic looked gone as he laid perfectly still. The only indication that he was indeed alive was the subtle shift of his chest as he breathed. If Enos didn't know any better, she could see him as the vigilante, the hero the public once knew him for. Defeat was in the job description, which apparently never changed with those who had abilities. "You'll be lucky to get a life sentence, if not the death penalty for what you caused," Nathan scowled, allowing Enos to kneel down and pull him up. In a moment, his face twisted into something bitter and irate, as he called a flame to his hand and grabbed Enos's wrist. She let a quick shout of pain, her body stalling at the burning sensation. The adrenaline she used previously to subdue him had already faded from her muscles, leaving her brain undecided of how to react, pull away from the smoldering hand, or to power through and fight back. She didn't have to think too long on the decision as she was pulled back by Nathan in a flurry, causing her to unintentionally land on her back. By the time she had gathered her bearings to stand again, she could see Nexus land one more solid punch to the side of Bonfire's already bloodied face, foot pinning him down on one of his arms. The silver rings that he had been wearing tumbled to the ground, out of reach as he tried to grab them again. Nexus then kneeled down by the villain, mouth moving with words still too quiet for Enos to hear. Whatever he asked Bonfire caused him to let out a wheezing laugh as he nodded. After a moment's pause, Nexus reached to the belt on his suit and grabbed something that Enos couldn't identify at first, but when she did, it felt like her chest had hollowed out. The metal cuff that Roth had given them to dampen the power snapped onto his wrist with a near silent click. "You think just because this worked out in your favor that I'll be the last? That villains and other vigilantes won't stop trying to take the Federation down from the inside out? You've won a battle today, not the war, Bonfire ranted, still trying to reach for his ring subtly. Enos limped over to where they laid, grabbing them in a swift movement, causing him to scowl up at her. "Do you ever shut up?" Nathan hissed, his eyes glowing with the vibrant green that came with his powers. The villain's mouth snapped shut, his eyes sharing the eerie color as Nexus took control. Nathan looked up at Enos, asking a silent question that she tried to think of an answer for. Then it hit her like a punch. Slipping on one of the rings, she watched as Nathan's eyes snapped to hers, confused. In the same moment, she could feel his familiar presence evaporate from her mind, like it had earlier when she had tested the cuffs in the meeting room. "On top of being a criminal and an arsonist, you're also a thief," she said slowly, removing the cool metal and tucking it into her pocket. Bonfire glared at her with intent to kill, still struggling against Nathan's hold. They were gifts. Charity's dad knew better than to trust the heroes, so he made them to protect his daughter. Do you ever wonder how someone from the moors knew beyond basic science? Don't go blaming me because she decided to give them to me instead. If anything, it's Roth who's the thief, with the design for these cuffs. "Come on, the others should be waiting for us at the checkpoint," Nathan addressed Enos, tugging the villain up to a standing position. He moved to pull the man along, causing Bonfire to plant his feet like roots. "No." "I'm afraid you don't really have a choice in the matter," Nathan told him, moving to push him again. He still relented, not moving from his spot. "No, I've made my point today. There's nothing more you could do to me that would mean anything. These things might seem small, but they're only the beginning to so much more," he nodded, resigned and accepting. "Roth is expecting us. Let's go," Nathan repeated sternly, eyes already shifting back into the unnatural green that he called upon his powers. "Compared to what Roth can do, and has done, I'm the least of your concerns," Bonfire said. His face twisted into thought, unreadable to Enos as she looked between the two of them. Before she could mentally ask her partner what the villain was thinking, Nexus moved in a panic before she could catch on. Once she did, it was clear as day what his goal was. The same knife that he had tried to use against the eagle had been tucked into his sleeve upon Nathan's arrival. In one swift movement, he set the blade with a steady hand and drove it across his own neck. He crumpled to the ground in a useless heap, muttering the name of a vigilante who was long gone, and the two tried to apply first aid. The gash was too deep and too jagged, but they still tried. Enos was distantly grateful that her senses were still muffled from the bomb. After everything today, she didn't think she could have handled hearing his heart stop and still in his chest. Neither of the duo said a word, staring down at the once hero, once vigilante, turned villain, Keegan Solian. His eyes, glossed over and empty, wouldn't leave them for days, but it was something that they were used to. After all, the moors were always haunted. When they reached the checkpoint, Enos tried to pretend that she could look at Roth, and Roth himself tried to pretend that he didn't recognize the body of the dead villain. Enos didn't think that she had had that many doctors check her over in her life before. There seemed to be at least 3 at all times checking over and patching her wounds with some sort of antibacterial spray, bandage, or stitch. Once she had been ushered away from Nathan, who seemed to sustain internal injuries worse than hers, she let her mind drift, straining to hear any beat of his heart, but failing due to the temporary damage to her ears. The only thing that seemed to be playing on loop was the cuff locking around Bonfire's wrist as he accepted what he'd have to do. He claimed to know things beyond both Nathan and Enos about the Federation, about Roth and his dirty work. With the rings he had possessed still tucked into one of the pockets, she couldn't help but wonder if the cuffs were one of the things that he had met. Both technologies were of similar nature, the same sleek metal that did something to the biology of those with abilities. They put them on lock somehow, and they were only limited to those who seemed to wear them. If she was going to believe the psychopath that she had just fought, then she'd be safe to assume that they were made from the same engineer at the Brandstone Labs. The doctors had long since left before a knock drew her out of her thoughts. She called to the person to enter, Nathan limping his way with a crutch to where she sat at the edge of the medical bed. "Glad to see you're still in one piece. How are the ears?" he asked, pulling a seat over. Huffing a forced laugh, she reclined into the stiff mattress, choosing to stare at the ceiling instead of his bruised face. "Better than earlier, although the left one is still pretty muffled. How's your everything else?" she shot back with a small chuckle. "Nothing to be too worried about. I think we've sustained worse back when we were the ones running the moors," he answered with a small smile of his own. They both knew it was a lie, but they let it hang in the air anyway. Let the silence consume them, minds wandering to their own thoughts. Moving closer to the edge of the bed, Enos reached out and grabbed one of Nathan's hands. "Why'd you use the cuff?" she asked in a quiet voice. Nathan shuffled in the hard plastic seat before looking at Enos fully. "You were hurt, and I didn't see any other option," he said with a shrug, heartbeat imperceptibly picking up as he half lied. Encouragingly, she squeezed his hand as she spoke again. "We both agreed that there were other ways to go about his arrest," she murmured, rubbing her thumb over his calloused knuckles. "And we also agreed on reforming the Federation, not trying to tear it down," he shot back, a foreign bitterness lacing his voice. Furrowing her brow, she leaned forward to look at her companion properly. A muscle in his jaw was tightly wound as he clamped it shut, eyes focusing on the light fixture, or anywhere but Enos. "What are you talking about?" "Back in the basement," he began quietly, almost hesitantly. "You agreed that the world would be better off without heroes." At first she was confused for a moment, until she recalled. Enos couldn't help but laugh humorlessly once she did. "A brief thought of wondering doesn't mean I was agreeing with him," she explained, struggling to not feel slightly offended. "I'm not saying that you are," Nathan stated to defend, but his words quickly fell flat. "What does that have to do with you using the cuffs?" Enos redirected. At those words, he dropped his eyes to his laps, inhaling sharply as he looked back up at her. "I know you don't trust Roth and the other heroes, but I do. I've been their ally for years now, and they haven't led me astray yet. Besides, we have no proof that Bonfire was telling the truth about the Federation, knowing more about Fergus Hansen than they said. He wasn't the most mentally stable," he declared, with an air of nervousness. He gently squeezed her hand, then stood to pace the room. For a moment, Enos thought of scolding him as he began to hobble around with his crutch, but decided against it. "It feels like you're trying to choose one or the other," she observed quietly. "No, I'm not," he immediately replied. Enos chose not to comment on how his heart lightly raced as he spoke. "It's just that we're not kids living in the moors anymore. We are now dealing with high-risk situations that can not only kill us, but a lot of other people if we're not careful. And I know that, so don't act like I'm out of the loop," she shot back, failing to keep the frustration out of her voice. I know, he all but whispered, sitting back down at her bedside, running a hand through his hair. "I don't trust Roth," she confessed. "I do," he said after a moment. They both sat in silence, eyes drifting anywhere but each other. The information wasn't new, a long time coming actually, but the sting still lingered. That was the pain of growing up together. It always hurt knowing that they can survive without the bond they built together. Enos wasn't exactly jealous of Roth, but there was something there that was festering in her heart. It was fear. She had agreed with anyone who called Bonfire a villain for what he did to the Moors, not even just today, but in his entire terror-driven reign. In secret, she couldn't stop thinking about his accusations of the Valiant Federation, everything that they stood for in the shadows. They lined up with her previous theories from when she was younger, and at a time, Nathan agreed with her. "You still come first," he offered, speaking truly. Once again connecting their hands, he brought hers up to his mouth and pressed a feather-like kiss to the bandaged skin. She laughed despite the flush and returned the pressure. She was thankful for the changed topic, gladly embracing the familiar. "I thought it was me who promised the kiss after the mission," she teased, already feeling lighter than a moment ago. "Well, if you're offering." It wasn't anything of passion or lust, nothing more than what they needed in that moment. The warmth of their lips colliding healed something that they didn't know it needed to. While the connection of their hands, still intertwined, gave them the reassurance, the kiss was a soft reminder that they were there, together, and alive. It was a silent promise that they'd do anything in their power to keep it that way. It was an adventure, nostalgia, and home all in one. Of course, they had to eventually part, but that didn't stop Enos from tugging him to lay on the uncomfortable hospital bed with her. He laughed, settling to let her press her right ear to his chest. The dull drumbeat almost pulled her to sleep in moments. "I think I just wish you had given me a heads up before you used the cuffs," she told him mentally. She could hear his lungs almost constrict with the sigh he held back. Instead, he just pulled her impossibly closer. He didn't give her a reply, running a hand through the loose blonde strands of Enos's hair as if to calm her. She knew that she wouldn't be angry about Nathan protecting and defending her, but it was still a struggle as to how he did it. It felt like a choice, and he went with the option that wasn't her, but Roth. Maybe she was wrong, thinking too much into the adrenaline-driven decision. Deep down, she knew that she was lying to herself, but in the moment, she couldn't care. Every burn, scratch, and bruise ached with a ferocity that would linger for weeks after her healing period was over. It was then that she decided their conversation was something that they could discuss later, when they were both healthy and ready. For now, sleep never seemed more inviting. I think it would be best for you to heal in a more familiar environment. Your home can provide that for you, Roth repeated for what felt like the millionth time to Enos. She just huffed at the older man, arms crossed defensively from where she sat in his office. Anyone else might have felt a little intimidated having a private meeting with the top hero, but all Enos could muster was frustration. Where I heal doesn't matter. In fact, I would be better off here. If you weren't aware, I lived in the moors, which is now lacking a hospital, she fired back. It seemed that every time the two of them interacted, it was a battle of wills, of who could outwit who. Enos had seemed to be winning this time, based off the exasperated sigh Roth released. Fine, then for the safety of not just yourself, but the other heroes as well, he spat back. Immediately her mind drifted to Nathan, who was drawn away from her a while ago to do paperwork. Don't be too jealous of me. It's just another plus of being a registered hero, he told her before leaving. At the time, she had laughed to mask the heavy feeling of the word hero caused. Regardless, it still hurt knowing that she had to choose between staying at the Valiant Federation's headquarters or back in the cramped apartment in the moors, alone. Why are you pushing so hard for me to leave? She asked honestly. Roth leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. I'm not lying about you being dangerous to others right now. Nexus told us about how Bonfire had specifically been targeting you with not only his words, but in battle as well. Additionally, the press is already trying to get scraps about what went wrong, and you haven't been trained in media to know how to answer their questions. His bluntness surprised her, along with his strong heartbeat that meant he was being truthful, half expecting him to come up with a lie that he just wanted what was best for her. It was a small step forward to respecting him, even if it were still miles to go. A brutal truth was always better than a kind lie, in her opinion. She gave him a slow nod, continuing to contemplate her options. So this is a media stunt. The sending me away part, I mean, she asked for clarification. Roth huffed out a breath, deciding against rolling his eyes as if he almost forgot that this was a worthless fight. You being here brings more unwanted attention than ever. Who's to say that another person you pissed off when you were a teen isn't going to come out of the woodworks? I never knew Bonfire. He was your ally before he was my enemy. Roth fell silent, flexing his jaw in contemplation. Sighing, he stood and rummaged through different drawers until tossing one of the files onto the desk in front of Enos. Cautiously grabbing it, she flipped it open to reveal the comm report from yesterday, all the way up to the point until the device was knocked out of her ear. There were chunks of the conversation blocked out with squares of black ink, censoring different pieces of information. Flipping through, she'd realized the entire last half of the conversation with Bonfire was blacked out. As far as the public is aware, Bonfire was a vigilante that ran around the moors, getting an ego too big for his power. To get the attention of the heroes, for recognition, he decided to bomb a hospital, Roth explained slowly, eyes trained on her hidden expression. At the bottom of the final page, Roth had signed off on any censorship, written in sharp, messy letters. A random hospital. The rest of the conversation was unheard because your comm got damaged. That's the story. Enos sat in a seething silence, letting Roth study her. It was typical that they'd let the vigilantes take the brunt of his actions, and the heroes would get away with whatever they were pleased. A never-ending cycle that Enos would only push to stop, even though it was slowly seeming like a pointless fight. What was his name? She asked after a moment. Keegan Solian. He didn't lie about that. No, his hero title. What was he called? Nothing, Roth replied, heart revealing that he wasn't entirely lying, but not telling the whole truth. He gathered the file and turned to place it back on the pile it was originally resting on, signifying the end of the conversation. We're never going to be your equals, are we? She asked, standing with hidden effort from the protesting ribs. Roth just looked at her with a sad smile, speaking quietly. You have the option to be in my eyes, but you've made your opinion on that choice very clear. Enos was waiting for her driver in the lobby of the headquarters to take her back to the moors. The sun had begun to set, leaving most of the workers to pass by her, returning home for the night. None were heroes, just those who worked in medical or the offices in the lower levels of the building. Few gave her sparing looks, some of pity or confusion. There were few of the bitter resentment, but Eunice was no stranger to those. She was a little disappointed that Nathan hadn't come to see her off, working away in his office on whatever Roth had assigned him. While she was grateful that she didn't have to fill out the mission reports due to her lack of license, she couldn't help but wish that he would have stalled some to at least say goodbye before her departure. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the light on the elevator brighten, an indication of a passenger, revealing Clyde in his janitor cart as such. Whistling that familiar tune, he made his way behind the receptionist's desk and began emptying the trash. Instead of immediately calling out to him, she tried to study who he was. The hair on his head was thin, made up for his bushy facial hair. His brown eyes were warm, unlike Eunice's herself. Despite the harsh words and strong opinions, he still had an affectionate air about him. Whether it was because he had no choice to accept it, or he truly had a good heart, he was still kind despite the obvious hard years that he had endured. "Hello, Eunice," he greeted with heaviness. His eyes, still warm, seemed to hold a new type of sadness. She could relate, unfortunately, shooting him a small smile that didn't quite meet her own eyes. "Don't worry, I'll be out of here soon enough. You'll be safe from me interrupting your work at night for at least a few weeks," she joked, standing to hand him the plastic trash can that had sat beside her. He accepted it, huffing out his own laugh. "Thank goodness. I chose to work that late at night for a reason," he returned with a light tone in his voice. Any other day, Eunice would find herself continuing the joking banter that she often found herself engaging with Clyde. But this wasn't any other day. No, it was the first evening after hell. "I won't keep you any longer. I'm sure that you have plenty of hero messes to clean up for the next couple of days. A lot of overtime on both your parts, I'm sure," she concluded, moving to sit back down in an uncomfortable waiting chair. "Actually, Eunice," he started quickly before she could, "there was something I wanted to give you before you left on your paid vacation." "Okay," she hesitated, not sure what else to say. It was no parting gift, that she was sure of. Her mind was blank of what he could have had for her. His heart rate spiked with nervousness, palms slightly dampening with sweat as he pushed the cart of cleaning supplies out of the way. He then motioned for her to follow him, which she quickly did despite her injuries protesting. The two entered the empty elevator, Clyde pushing the button for one of the highest floors as the doors shut. Eunice began to rack her mind as to what was on that floor, but came up with nothing. Deciding that she would find out soon enough, choosing to trust Clyde, she kept the uncomfortable silence and leaned against the wall for the rest of the ride. When the doors opened with a quiet chime, she let Clyde lead the way. The walls were stark white and smelled of chemicals, but they weren't back in the medical center. Approaching a locked door, Clyde flashed a badge at the scanner with practiced ease, turning the light from a glaring red to a green. Eunice thought back to where her own ID would allow her, not finding a room on her clearance level. He continued to lead her down a maze of hallways, finally approaching the sign to what was called the Brandstone Labs. It was empty and dimly lit, but that didn't deter the old janitor. "I debated for a long time if I should show you this," he prefaced, walking to the back of the room and inserting a key into one of the doors. Pushing it open, it revealed a small living quarter that would almost rival an apartment that one could find in the moors. Ushering her inside, he turned and locked the door with an air of seriousness. Without another word, he walked over to a small desk that was crammed to the corner and unlocked the drawer. Inside, there were different types of files, a few books, and a banged-up first aid kit, and a brooch that reflected the flickering light. After a moment of searching, he grabbed one of the unlabeled files and handed it to Eunice, getting deja vu of the meeting she had not even an hour ago with Roth. "I'll leave you to look at that, but I'll need it back afterwards," he said cryptically, locking the drawer back up. He paused, looking up at her with words on his tongue, but decided against them. With a squeeze to her non-burned arm, he hurried out of the room and turned back out to the lab area, clicking the bedroom door shut once again. The only noise in the air was the dull thrum of electricity cutting in and out. It was at least a small comfort, meaning her hearing wasn't permanently damaged after the blast. Flicking open the file, a small piece of paper fluttered out. Kneeling down, she grabbed what she identified as a check, and she tried to read the nearly illegible writing of the name. Her stomach dropped, assuming that she had misread it, but she could see no other option as to whom it was addressed. Fergus Hansen, written in sharp and messy letters. Eunice felt cold just staring down at the old check that was worth far more than anything she'd ever dreamed of owning. Her heart thundered in her chest as she set it down delicately, moving to look through the rest of the file. The next page contained a blacked-out mission report, similar to the one Roth had signed off on earlier. There were very few words left on the page, making it impossible to gather any information on it. Trying to hold the page up to the light, she could vaguely see the names of those speaking. She was able to make out a few heroes she was familiar with: Calfaction, Nightshade, and even Jupiter, a strength-checked hero who had died a few years back. Keeping track on who seemed to be with who on missions, there were random lines of dialogue scattered about them, almost as if the person wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Flipping through the pages, they all consisted of the same thing: vague outlines of missions from a few years ago, but enough information that was blacked out that there was no way to decipher what actually happened during them. Enos thought about losing hope of understanding them until she reached one of the final pages. There was a note paperclipped to the top in Roth's unmistakable handwriting. Refer to the cuckoo bird. The words made no sense to her, but they were important enough to be attached to the report. Her first instinct was to throw the file down and confront Roth at that very moment. Surely he was still wasting away in his office, signing off on some more pointless mission transcripts that would mean nothing in hindsight. Breathing deep, she collected her thoughts and what she knew. 1. Keegan wasn't lying about Fergus Hansen being involved with the Federation. There was at least a temporary alliance that produced a high income for him, which was likely came from the redacted missions. 2. There was a person or a project referred to as the Cuckoo Bird. There were no alarms ringing in her mind about any vigilante or hero with that name, but she didn't want to rule anything out just yet. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be tied to Fergus, and in turn could make sense of anything that Bonfire mentioned. Regardless, the note was important enough for Roth to write, so she didn't want to ignore it. And 3. Clyde was an important factor in all of this. Not only had she led Enos to an area far above her clearance, he was also collecting these files and keeping them stored away. The main question circling her head was asking why. Why was he so involved in the misdeeds of his employer when it didn't outright affect him? As she went to place the paper back into the folder, one scrap caught her eye. It had been pushed to the back, crumpled and bent to the point of destruction. Grabbing it, it was clear that it wasn't another slip of paper, but a Polaroid picture. There were 3 figures posing side by side, all teens who couldn't have been out of high school yet. 2 boys and a girl, all crammed together to fit into frame. The tallest boy, who stood on the far left, was grinning from ear to ear with a baseball cap on his head. The girl in the middle was stretching her arms wide so that they could lazily lay on the shoulders of the 2 boys. She had a familiar face and warm eyes, but overall a typical teenager who could have been seen anywhere. The third and final figure was the puzzle piece that completed everything. He looked kinder as a kid, lacking the hardened spirit that he carried when he was bigger. Fergus Hansen was a hard face to misplace, especially when someone like Enos was almost killed by him. It would be safe to assume that the boy on the right was Keegan, long before he'd become a hero, and even longer before Bonfire. She mentally scolded herself for not instantly placing his face when she saw it. If Enos didn't know any better, she would have assumed that he was just another teen who was a part of the Moore's doomed narrative. Unlike Fergus, he returned the girl's hold, like a side hug that brought her close to him. It was with dread like ice did Enos finally recognize her. She'd only ever seen Charity Karras in dimly lit living rooms in the moors, halfway to bleeding out as the vigilante known as the Bandit patched her up. Seeing her as a teenager, a normal person outside of her society-hardened persona, was shell-shocking. It felt wrong and desolate, knowing that in a few years after the photo, she'd face an awful fate. All of them, not becoming the person they had thought they would be. Flipping over the picture, she could see a date and a message scrawled on haphazardly. Enos didn't recognize the handwriting, but it was easy to decipher compared to Roth's. Academy Evaluation Day, it read. It was an annual day of observation that the Federation had participated in, used to encourage inspiring teens to attend the academy. They'd go out to schools, even in the moors, to see what kind of powers the students had, giving them recommendations on a career path that they should choose because of it. Knowing the fate of the trio, it was clear that the Valiant Federation didn't know the genius that Charity would become, not recommending her to the school. In a bittersweet thought, she was glad, not wanting to think of what kind of menace Charity would have been had she not become the vigilante, the bandit. If she had years to study the photo, Enos still didn't think it would be enough time to scrutinize every detail it provided. Laying it on top of the paper, she placed the file down and opened the door to the bedroom to find Clyde. Sitting at one of the lab stations, messing with an unknown material, he immediately perked up at the sound of the squeaky hinges swinging. "Why do you have these?" was the first question out of her mouth before she could help it. Before she could backtrack and apologize, he gave a wry smile, ushering her back into the room and locking the door. There have been many things over the years people have noticed about the Valiant Federation. Heroes who come and go, missions that no one can find anything about, and alliances that were never made known to the public, he spoke, tucking the file away and locking it into the drawer with care. "Why have you been so invested in Fergus Hansen, Keegan Solian, and Charity Karas?" she insisted. Clyde frowned at the names sitting in the chair that was shoved away from the desk. Enos could hear his breath hitch a few times as he tried to decide how to respond. This isn't the first instant that the heroes have made questionable choices about situations like this. Either they're blown out of proportion or swept under the rug to accumulate into a bigger problem for future generations, he explained tiredly. Enos nodded, both understanding but at the same time confused. "You knew that Bonfire was going to tell me about his time at the Federation," she guessed. Clyde nodded, sighing. Keegan was always looking for a way to make things interesting. If shaking up the Federation in one grand finale was his goal, then telling you was the best way to achieve it, he said in a sad manner. In the dim lighting of the room, Enos could almost say that he looked to be mourning. "So he wasn't lying about Fergus Hansen being involved with the Federation?" she asked slowly. Even though she was sure of the answer she would get, it didn't hurt any less to hear it out loud. No, he was being honest about that. He was never one to needlessly lie, he said with a strong heartbeat. "How do you know so much about him? About any of them from that picture, for that matter?" Clyde's heartbeat spiked again with nervousness, adrenaline pushing through his veins as he sat up straighter. He opened and closed his mouth a couple times, a muscle in his jaw twinging as he thought. As he seemed to find the words to speak, a knock interrupted them. "Burton, are you in there?" the disruptor called. Sighing at what could have been relief or annoyance, he stood from his seat and unlocked the door again. "Sorry, I was just taking a breather," he explained lamely to the person on the other side of the door. They wore a scientist's signature white coat, along with a badge hanging from a lanyard around their neck. "Oh, all right, I just had a question, but I can come back if you're in the middle of something," the person said sheepishly, looking at Enos from where she stood. She was about to agree, wanting to get more answers from Clyde before he spoke again. "Don't worry about it, we were just finished catching up anyway," he laughed, holding the door open for Enos. With slow steps, she left the room one final time with many objections on the tip of her tongue. A pointed look from Clyde stopped her from verbalizing any of them as he turned to her. "Enjoyed your paid vacation, hero. We'll talk about it when you get back," he wished farewell. His heartbeat told her that he was being honest, which put Enos at more ease than she'd like to admit. The scientist was already seated at one of the working stations, fingers tapping against the side of their thigh as they already fell deeper into thought. "I'm not a hero," she retorted once again, humorously thinking that it was the only phrase she could use to end a conversation with him. As she left the lab, there was one thought that stood above the storm of questions raging in her head. She had never met that statement more than she had today.